getting into this band, Images in Vogue, really I was a drummer and percussionist, but I knew I had keyboard experience. And Joe Visvari in Images in Vogue was, at that time, I consider him to be absolute genius because he really was utilizing analog equipment in a very, very progressive way. And he just exposed my mind and the other people's mind in the band to how to work with electronics. And so we started collecting a lot of that stuff back there. And then that opened the doorway to how to, approach music with, synthesizers and electronics. So, well, I think what was interesting is that, the learning experience of being in Images in Vogue was like a full, almost, it was like university because we encountered everything that we could learn about music, like the industry, recording, how to do all these things, how to play live, how to be in a band. And then I realized that I was doing all these things, but I wasn't really touching where I felt I was. It wasn't long before I found myself in the recording practice space on my own and formulating my own ideas that I didn't realize I was making my first songs. And then before too long, I was at a party and there was some equipment there. It was like a Pro 1 and a TR-606. And I just roughly put it together and set it up, and I started jamming this thing in the corner. And this other guy at the party who I didn't know came up to me and showed an interest. And I said, well, why don't you write some lyrics and I'll record it? And it turned out to be Ogre, just like that. And so that was the creation of our first song, was completely by random. At the same time, I was hanging out in a lot of the late night clubs in Vancouver, and I was really good friends with Bill Lieb. And so Bill Lieb at that time was a guy that was really ahead of the game as far as the stuff he was listening to. I mean, sure, we were all listening to, new wave and everything that was coming out and everything like this, but Bill had already cracked the surface of the underground, and he was well into Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, and like the early likes of the experimental industrial scene. And then so what kind of made it interesting is that we would get together and sort of talk about how most of these bands use really minimal production as far as their rhythms were concerned. And everyone was always using really small, tiny little drum machines and stuff, and we thought that what would it take if we would go into a studio and just start messing around with production on rhythm and emphasize the drums as being these huge things with electronics. And that was what I think really broke ground for Skinny Puppy. I remember that Tom Harrison from the Vancouver Sun said something like dance music for late night individuals or something very early, and I was thinking, wow, that's probably what we are, because this is where we came from. I started to realize that by misusing something, I would end up with something better than by trying to treat it properly or something. And so that's why I sort of piqued an interest in equipment that I could find for a couple $100s. Like in those days, people were getting rid of their analog stuff cheap. So I was going out and buying Moogs for 200, or we go out and everyone kind of bought a mini Moog. It was at that time Bill and all of us when I was basically really wanting to just get into analog and then see how we could mess it up. So that was really, really kind of the impetus and what brought us together is that we would get a Porta studio and all get together and jam. And we kind of called that brap. It was like jamming with our word for that. And that kind of formed like a whole party that would happen each weekend. And we'd end up laying down quite a few tracks and then realized later that I think years later, that we were onto something pretty progressive at the time. It is true that the band Skinny Puppy, I believe, is entirely formed around the joy of discovering the Lexicon PCM41 delay. I mean, the first time I heard this delay, I thought, this is God. And so everything that we did was processed through that. And so the world of digital was right away, as far as like how we were using that and what we were hearing as, you know, the whole idea is that what are we hearing? It was just so fabulous. And then so to take the original Korg delays, the STD 1000s, and use those as samplers was really, really instantly gratifying, that we could replace the drums on a TR-808 with a click trigger, that we could have a or a, you know, and it would create this whole new face. And it was really that when we met Tom Mellard from Severed Heads, that basically he was the impetus for saying, never use normal drum sounds again. Let's hit that pillow, let's bash that box, let's hit that bar, and record it into the delay and trigger it. And that was like, opened up a whole new door. The next doorway being opened was by Dwayne Gettle, absolute genius. When I met Dwayne, he was in an opening band that played with Skinny Puppy called Water. He was like a one-man band with a girl singer, Mandy, and they were just amazing. And I was like jaw-dropping about what he was achieving at the time. I think it was like 1985. And I came backstage and I said, hey, how are you doing? And he goes, wow, you sound like excessive 16K to me. I was like, wow, this guy's a genius. I somehow had this inkling that when Bill Lieb didn't want to tour, that I felt like I maybe found the right guy in Dwayne. And so we talked and he showed massive interest, but what Dwayne brought into the band and brought along was his whole new experience with like the Mirage, the new sampler of the day, the Insonic Mirage. You know, that thing was like the spaceship when it first arrived. It made people get rid of everything, you know, and start thinking on that level because it was affordable. The last album of Skinny Puppy, The Process, we were in a situation where we had time and a studio and a house, and we had ideas that were kind of in a crossroads. We didn't know whether to go fully techno or where it was headed. We were in a state of where there was a bit of confusion, but a lot of things were happening. And then I think Fred from Psychic TV came in and he had a Surge panel. I said, what's that? And he says, oh, you got to check this out. And I got a panel and I started messing with that. And so yeah, that was my first real entry into modular. And a song came out of that called Blue Surge, which is really just the beginnings of messing with it. I realized that that whole world was quite large and ever expansive journey. And that really kind of formed the impetus for what really became Download. Which after that, we got together in a studio with most of this equipment and started sort of experimenting and forming, like, for us again, a new ground, because it wasn't something that was, you know, a verse, chorus, bridge like Skinny Puppy. It was more about where is this electronic music taking me?